So good afternoon, everyone. Good morning to the colleagues in New York and good evening to the colleagues in the Pacific. Thanks for making time for joining this UNEG Evaluation Practice Exchange. My name is Caspar Merkler from the UNESCO Evaluation Office, and I'm very happy that I was given the opportunity to lead this EPE on lessons from joint evaluation and audit. Welcome to this EPE. The reason why we thought we are presenting on this topic and we would like to initiate the discussion on this is that in UNESCO we have quite some good experience on joint evaluation and audit exercises. So we thought it's a good moment to share some of the lessons, but then also use the opportunity to learn and hear from others on what their experience has been. So this is really the point of this discussion today. Some of the findings I'm sharing is from a book which some of you may have seen. It's called Crossover of Audit and Evaluation Practices, which was published, I think, 2 years ago. And in that book, our former director of oversight also contributed the chapter. So some of the lessons that I'm presenting here are actually from that book. I'll give the reference to this book later on. In terms of what we are going to cover today, you see the agenda for the EPE. We have about an hour. And I'll spend about 25 to 30 minutes taking you through some of the content, which includes some definitions and conceptual framework on how we distinguish audit and evaluation and how they potentially work together. And then I'll give you some insight into 5 opportunities. This is really the opportunity for a bigger discussion. I was about to say, because this discussion on joint engagement between evaluation and audit is really touching on some of the issues on how we evaluators and auditors, how we see ourselves and how we position or understand ourselves within what we call the oversight spectrum. So maybe the discussion we're having today is potentially going to lead into some further exchange and discussion at UNEG level. So I'd like to actually kick off the discussion and hear from you very briefly on what your experience has been with joint audit and evaluations. So I'm launching a quick poll, which everybody should see on the screen. The question is, have you been involved in a joint evaluation and audit? Please submit your answers, and then the results will show in the chat, and we can look at them together. Thank you. So we have a couple of colleagues who have been involved in joint evaluation and audit. The majority has not been involved. So as I said at the beginning, we'll invite the colleagues after my own presentation to also share their experiences. Let's kick off with some definitions on evaluation, on internal audit, and on performance audit. And now I'm not going to go into much detail, and this is really just a starting point to distinguish evaluation and audit. What is important is some of the similarities, right? So evaluation, but also audit share similarities in terms of their strong notion on independence, on objectivity, and on impartiality. But then there is some key differences between the concepts. If we look at the first definition around evaluation, we all know that. But what is important in that is the notion of looking at both expected and unexpected results. And then I would say also the evaluation criteria that we try to apply as consistent as possible in our evaluations. While for internal audit, we have a definition, quite a standard definition up there, which is about a systematic, disciplined approach to assess and improve the effectiveness of risk management, control, and governance processes. And the performance audit goes beyond that, right? We see the definition up there, looks at systems, operations, programs, and activities, or a whole organization using the principles of economy, efficiency, or effectiveness. Now, another way to look at this is through the results pyramid. So this is a simplified approach for looking at differences between evaluation and audit. At the same time, it helps to understand some of the conceptual differences. So an audit, and we know the fields have been evolving over time, traditionally focuses on the analysis on inputs, activities, and outputs. In other words, the lower end of the results chain, while the evaluation would tend to look at outputs, outcomes, and potentially at impact. Then the next slide, what you see up there is, again, a differentiation between evaluation and audit, which also helps to understand how they potentially fit together, how they complement each other. So in terms of methods, in evaluation, we traditionally put a lot of emphasis on consulting with a wide range of stakeholders, of partners. This includes partners, external partners, for example, governments, NGOs, civil society, etc. While traditionally, and again, the fields are evolving, in an audit, the methods would focus more on desk review type of data to look at compliance, at risk management, and governance processes. So in audit, the focus is on looking at management systems, on process and practice to provide assurance. Assurance is a keyword in any audit exercise. And in a way, an evaluation goes beyond that focus on institutional capability or institutional capacity. So in other words, and this is what you see as sort of a bottom line under that table, is if compliance is the result of an audit, it potentially is a start for another analysis in evaluation, because we know if an organization is compliant with rules and regulations, it doesn't necessarily mean that the organization is delivering on results, because we have all sorts of factors such as the work of governments, the work of partners, we have natural catastrophes, etc., that impact on whether we deliver or not. Right? So the evaluation takes that broader analysis, looking at overall context and systems. Now, the following is a brief rundown on some of the opportunities. In other words, what is the added value of working together in a joint evaluation and audit? The first one is really about combining resources. So we know we are working in a context of scarce resources. At the same time, the demand for our services are increasing. And so the idea is, if we work together, we help to avoid duplicate efforts. At the same time, we all have heard about this issue with oversight fatigue, right? So if we deliver a joint product, a joint evaluation and audit, we can reduce the overall number of reports. And with that, we ask for less requests from management. The management needs to provide less management responses and feedback into those reports. So combining resources makes a lot of sense to increase synergies. One example, I was together with the audit colleague co-leading a joint engagement which we labeled a performance audit, and our audit colleague is online. She'll also share her view on that process later on. But the report did have a very good impact in the organization in UNESCO, and one of the reasons was actually the quality of the report. Next one is about improving methodologies, right? So we come with different skill sets, we come with different expertise, and if we work together, we strengthen the methodological toolbox of both teams. I personally found it refreshing, I would say, to work together with Audit. At the same time, what we learned over time is that we continuously need to explain to each other what we mean with the different operational concepts, right? For example, in evaluation, what do we mean with an evaluation inception report, right? And audit, both, and evaluation have their own working terminology, and that needs translation if we are working together. Now, the next opportunity in terms of working together is about answering efficiency, and this really is about one of the issues we have found in our evaluations, and this is not specific to UNESCO, in that many evaluations actually fail to comprehensively address efficiency. And evaluations are not strong at looking at efficiency for different reasons. It's because we don't have time, maybe, or maybe also we don't have the expertise to dissect and analyze, for example, business processes. So examples of that type of analysis where we found auditors to be particularly strong is, for example, looking at issues around procurement or HR processes or financial delivery. On the other hand, this is the next opportunity. And this is a feedback we got from auditors, is that this process, which we know from evaluation about engaging partners, engaging stakeholders, is very useful in terms of helping to generate ownership and acceptance of the results. Right? So we usually have, for our evaluations, we have some kind of reference group in place. And we know that this type of stakeholder engagement is critical to ensure the acceptance and the use of the findings. So that participatory approach, we know this is enshrined in our own norms and standards, but it's new, or it's quite different to how auditors work. And this is one of the key differences between the two disciplines. And then finally, on the opportunity, we know in evaluation, I mean, all our offices in the different agents, we have invested a lot in terms of improving evaluation communication, improving evaluation knowledge management. And we know that these targeted communication strategies are key to get the message out and to get the report and the different evaluation products to the end user. Again, this is very different to how auditors work, right? Just to give you an example, in UNESCO, the audit reports are published only as summary reports, right? But the full report remains within the organization as an internal document, and there's different reasons to that. So we are coming with different standards, but obviously this has implications in terms of how our findings, our results reach a broader audience and how those findings can lead into processes, for example, around knowledge management. So this is a key difference, but at the same time, I would see is a big opportunity. Now, this is a summary slide on our experiences with joint engagement in audit and evaluation. And it gives an overview on, it gives a classification of those engagements. It's based on that book which I mentioned, Crossover of Audit and Evaluation Practices. What it basically does is it provides different types of collaboration which are either planned or ad hoc. And then it also distinguishes between the number of products or the number of reports that are being generated, right? So broadly speaking, we have examples of what we call ongoing or formative collaboration between audit and evaluation. This is the first category. So this is our sort of daily working together. For example, when I walk over to a colleague in the audit office and ask, can you help me with this, with looking at this financial data? Or if the audit colleagues come to us evaluators and ask, can you help me with looking at this survey question, right? Now, in our case, in UNESCO, this is actually quite easy for different reasons. One is that we are co-located under one director, right? So we are sitting on the same floor. I'm surrounded by audit colleagues, for example. I would say the other reason is also that we get along pretty well with each other. And I would say the personal relationships with the colleagues, even sort of outside our own discipline, should not be underestimated when it comes to working together. So then the second one is really what we call the true joint engagements, where we have joint planning, joint data collection and analysis, and joint reporting resulting in one single report. And then the last category, or the last series of collaborations, is what we call the parallel, the integrated, or the separate models. And in a nutshell, most of them started as an evaluation exercise, and then an audit was requested, sort of came in at a later stage or along the way to look at specific issues, to look, for example, at business processes, to look, for example, at management issues. Now, in all of those cases, we had more than one output. We had more than one report, right? So it was working together, but resulting in different reports. Some of the challenges on working together, and I think this is important to keep in mind. when you think about starting a joint engagement or not. It really starts with this question of what do we call the baby, or is it a baby or is it a beast? Do we call it an evaluation? Do we call it an audit? Do we call it an assessment? And this discussion on how to name the engagement is reflective of a different issue behind, and that is that we actually, obviously, we stand in front of our own professional standards and protocols, and we are very proud of those standards and protocols. And it's not always easy to concile those different standards in a joint evaluation and audit exercise. Two examples is around stakeholder participation. I think I mentioned in my earlier slide that, for example, the use of reference group in an audit is usually not applied. And the other example I'd like to give is around transparency, is around publishing a report. So when you engage in a joint audit and evaluation, this is one of the things to clarify up front. Are we going to publish or not? Is it going to the board or not? And which standards are we following? Second point is, I mean, we still, and this goes back to what I said earlier on the translation work, right? We have our own working language, we have our own operational concepts, and we need to spend quite some time explaining to each other on how we work and how we do business. And the same applies for the client, right? If we approach the client, in many cases, we know there's still this confusion between audit and evaluation, sometimes even investigation. It's all thrown into the same pot. And so this clarification is important upfront before working together. Then on time, a joint engagement, and this is true, same as, for example, a joint program or a joint project planning process, obviously it takes more time, right? And we know why, for example, an evaluation takes time, because we have consultation processes, we have feedback processes, for example, through the reference group and through the different types of products that we are putting in place that we are asking for during the evaluation process. But the audits are usually done in a much shorter time period, right? And so when we think about a joint engagement, this is again an issue to think about. How much time are we giving us to deliver a joint product, and is this within the time frame that we have, so that the product can feed into that, for example, decision that is required. Fourth, potential challenges on governance and management structures. So who's leading on what? Who's signing off on the different products, right? In our case, for example, which I was involved in with the audit colleagues, we had joint decision making, and I would say it went smoothly, but I know from colleagues in other cases that joint decision making actually was a constraint to making timely decisions, for example, on when can we approve a report, when can we pay a consultant, etc. So that is one point to keep in mind. And then I hinted already at the different working methods, right? The different styles of reporting. We have, for an evaluation report, a structure which is pretty standard, which we also use for our quality assurance process. Now, an audit report usually looks different. And to apply a quality assurance process for an audit report, it should follow that audit report structure. So again, what is the template? What is the report structure that we are using? Is one of the issues to clarify upfront. We had in that case where we worked together with Audit, the example I was giving you before, we had 3 authors, right? We had myself, we had the audit colleague, and then we had a consultant. And I can talk of it, my own experience, where I spent quite some time in what I call retrofitting the report. Obviously, we come with different writing styles and language styles. And when we present the report, that needs to be polished, but it takes time. So that is not to be underestimated. And then finally, on data storage, I mean, this talks to the working methods and the filing systems, for example, which are different between audit and evaluation. Now, if you are working in a team, obviously you need a filing system in place which is efficient, which doesn't take too much time, and where still everybody can access the files at any point in time. So that is on the operational aspect of working together is quite important. Now, I spoke a lot. I would like to actually now take a short break and hear back from you, from the audience, on those challenges. And I have a quick poll which I'm going to launch. And the question around this poll is, which of those challenges which I presented right now resonates most with you? And I would ask you to answer this question. I mean, either you've been involved in a joint engagement yourself, or you can also imagine, okay, if I were to plan a joint engagement, what are some of the potential challenges I would see in working together? So I see some of the results are coming in, and the first one about how to frame and name the joint engagement, I think is leading. The second is lack of understanding on the two disciplines, the time implications, followed by governance and management, and then the methods and reporting templates. So it looks like the importance is given in sort of that way where I also presented them. Thank you for those answers. Now I'm coming to the last 2 or 3 slides, and this is the first one is around lessons from these exercises, from these joint engagements in UNESCO. And I'm sure there's many more lessons out there, but this is, as I say, is a starting point for a bigger discussion. One is on potential SOPs, on standard operating procedures. And I'm putting this up front because we were actually also, we were thinking about developing SOPs based on the lessons gathered. But then we sort of quickly came to the point, realized this is not possible, right? Because any collaboration is different. Any collaboration depends on the purpose of the exercise, on the purpose of the report, on the audience, on how that report is going to be used, etc. So the various types of collaboration should be chosen depending on the context and the key questions that the report is trying to answer. Another lesson is around what are potentially which type of collaboration is going to deliver the best results. And obviously, when a collaboration is well planned and assessed in advance, and I'll show you this checklist or tool in the next slide, then the potential use of the report is really increased and the impact of the report is increased. But there is a whole set of issues to clarify, right, around who is going to decide on the products during various stages of the process. What are the protocols for data collection, for data analysis? What is the protocol for quality assurance? What are we planning in terms of communication channels? And this is the tool that I wanted to present you. It's not just my own thinking. This is really the reflection of some joint reflection on our lessons in UNESCO on joint evaluation and audits. We came together a couple of times together with evaluation and audit colleagues and said, okay, listen, how do we move forward from this? As I said, a joint collaboration is much more likely and also much easier in cases where the functions are co-located, as we are in UNESCO. But it doesn't mean that it's impossible in other cases. So the first set of questions is really about, are we going to work together or not? And the issues to clarify in the first case is, what is the purpose of the assignment and for whom are we doing this, right? What type of product do we require and what type of product is going to be most useful? Are we presenting it to the board? Are we presenting it to a different audience? Do we all know what we mean with a joint engagement? Does the client understand the implications of a joint engagement? Then looking at all what I call the pros and cons of a joint engagement, which I presented before, looking at that together, what is really the expected main added value of such a joint product? Now, if the answers to those questions or issues is yes, then the next set of questions around, okay, we are going to work together now. How are we going to make this happen? How are we working together in terms of governance and management arrangements, in terms of decision making? What are the human and financial resources? Again, the example I was involved in, we had a team of 2 evaluators, 2 auditors, and an external consultant who helped us to address some of the key topical questions and who brought into the assignment a lot of substantive expertise on the topic. Again, there's no formula, right? Every joint engagement needs this kind of scoping to understand, okay, what are the time and resource requirements? And then there's quite a number of issues to clarify on the protocols, right? How are we collecting data? How are we analyzing data? How are we triangulating data? What report structure are we going to use? What is the quality assurance process? And then finally, how are we going to communicate our report and to whom? And how much time are we giving us? So this is in terms of the content that I wanted to share to kick off the discussion. The book I mentioned is called Crossover of Audit and Evaluation Practices. Anyone who wants to take a deep dive into this issue, I really recommend to look at this. And with that, I want to finish my own presentation. Thank you very much for listening. Now, before going into the Q&A, I'd like to briefly invite my colleague from Audit, who is online, to share her views on the joint engagement. And then after the Q&A, which I also want to invite other colleagues from other agencies who are online. I approached a couple of you before this EPE, and you'll have the floor to briefly also share your lessons. So based on this, then we can hopefully conclude with some key takeaway messages from this EP. So Eleni, I see you're online. Do you want to share your views on some of the lessons?
I am online, Casper. Thanks a lot. And it's a pleasure to be with all of you. Good morning, good day, and good evening to all of you. It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for inviting me, Casper. So, of course, I'm here representing the audit part. My name is Eleni Thanasoulias, Principal Auditor, Team Leader. And I had the pleasure of working with evaluation on my first joint engagement at UNESCO. I think in order to keep it brief, I'll just highlight a few key points that came out of my own experience, but especially the government meeting that we held back in June on lessons learned, actually. And although there were many challenges and many questions that arose as we went along, we all walked away having in mind the importance of specific elements and items that are worth highlighting once again for any future engagements. The first one being the governance structure of these joint engagements. Who is accountable for what? Like, is it mainly evaluation, mainly audit? Who is also reporting to whom within these joint teams? Is it more evaluation leading? Is it more audit leading? The teams, who are they in fact reporting to, right? Top down, bottom up. Extremely important. The reporting template knows well. I think this was a question that we should have asked ourselves from the beginning. What do we want it to look like? And of course, again, I come back to one of Casper's slides, 5 types of collaboration slide. So depending on the level of collaboration that we choose to engage in, that will also more likely determine what type of reporting template you choose to have at the end. But it's a critical question to ask from the onset. Would you like it to look more like an audit template or an evaluation template or a hybrid template? Much will depend, of course, as highlighted by Casper, on who the audience is ultimately of this joint engagement. Critical to keep in mind that there are no joint standards for joint engagements. So critical to keep in mind the UNEG standards, critical to keep in mind the IAA standards, and how do we work jointly together with different standards. I'll conclude by saying communication. Communication can never be underestimated. We realized that working together for the first time, really jointly, which was, I think, a great experience, required more communication at all levels and more regularly and more consistently. So communicate, communicate, communicate. From this, I'd like to move on to what was the client's opinion on the joint engagement. Very important to consider for future engagements, lessons learned. What did the customer client like? What did the customer not like as much? the timing was correct for us. We came on board to do this joint engagement when the timing was right. Like, it coincided with the onboarding of a new director, like ADG, of our program sector. And the timing was right because we took into account his concerns, his thoughts, and what he perceived to be potential challenges, including a potential need to reform internally the program sector. So I think we came on board like at a very good time during the year. It was a successful engagement because we were also, invited to present the report at the senior management retreat back in June, followed by another retreat that took place for the program staff in the Arab region. Following on, as part of every engagement that we do, at least from the audit side, and part of our quality assurance improvement program, we launched a survey to the client just to get their feedback on how they really perceive the audit and the joint engagement. Sorry, and we were assessed on 4 criteria: whether the planning and communication was satisfactory, whether the engagement process. Another criteria was whether the engagement process overall was satisfactory, whether the report was adequate, constructive, timely, consistent, and lastly, the performance of the team. Was the team professional, not knowledgeable? Did it take into account, as well, good practices carried out by the sector itself? And was the team carrying out their work with integrity? We scored very high on all of these criteria. However, for future engagements, I think it's important to take into account timing. This joint engagement took longer than expected, and this was in fact highlighted to a certain extent by the client survey. So we can always work on becoming more efficient and reducing the output time going forward. Lastly, as a gauge of success, and something that we can be proud of, we recently did a follow-up exercise to assess, to gauge the extent to which recommendations that we had issued had in fact been implemented. And we can see up until today, in fact, that the client has taken up the report and the recommendations with quite a lot of accountability, due diligence, seriousness, which one cannot say actually for every engagement that is in fact carried out. So we are in fact proud to see that the report has led the client to take action with a genuine interest to improve processes, procedures, efficiency and effectiveness going forward. So we look forward to carrying out a further assessment on the implementation of the recommendations to see further progress made. So overall, yeah, I'll conclude by saying that working jointly together was a very positive experience, not without its challenges. I think as we went along, it raised far more questions than answers. But by the time we finished and produced the report, we looked back and said, okay, now we need to establish a roadmap that will allow us for any future joint engagements going forward to answer a list of questions before we embark on anything further. To avoid like any pitfalls that one could, of course, deal with from the onset. So I'll close with that, and I'll hand the floor back to Casper. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Eleni, very much. This is a very important contribution also to hear from, sort of from the colleague side on how the exercise went. And I see we have other audit colleagues also online, which is great. Now, I'd like to pick up some of the questions very briefly that I see in the chat before we move on to some other colleagues and also give them the floor to share their experiences. I think there was a question from Martin, I see in the chat, on the question of efficiency, right? How did you address efficiency question, right? Now, I can only talk about my own experience, but in that case, we agreed up front. As I said, we had a 5-people team. we agreed up front on who is going to address which question. And the efficiency question was given to our audit colleagues, and that's how we didn't outsource, but this was an agreement up front. Then I see a question from Leslie on the model that we presented. When do you think it's best to apply a joint assessment and in what context? Yeah, so I think on that one, it really goes back to the checklist, right? The collaboration checklist, which I'm just putting that slide up front again. I think it's by applying this checklist and then deciding, are we going to have sort of enough added value from working together? And we know in every process there's pros and cons. But if the sum of the pros and cons sort of adds value to our products, then yes, we should go ahead, right? And as I say, in our experience, the impact from working together was very positive overall, right? And the reasons Eleni also explained, it had to do with the quality of the analysis, the quality of the report, etc. But it needs to be a careful assessment, and sort of blindly saying we are working together because working together is good, I think should not be the way to go. Another question from Andrew. Thanks for that one. So it's a good point. I mean, we have different expertise. I put this up in one of the slides. We have different experience, and our audit colleagues come with a lot of standardized credentials, right? There's a standard certification if you want to become an auditor. Now, in evaluation, we know, and we have had this discussion for many years, we are not there, and I'm not even sure if we will get there or when, right? We don't have a standard evaluation certification, but I do think that it's an important discussion, right? And it talks to the skill set that we want to see as evaluators, and for the auditors, as I said, because the certification is standardized, that skill set is sort of very much better defined already. These are the questions I have seen in the chat. Unless there's other burning questions, I'd like to invite some of the colleagues to share their experience. Who wants to go first? Maybe Chaitali, do you want to say a few words about the UN Women experience?
Yes, thank you so much. Hello, everyone. My name is Chaitali. I'm from the Independent Evaluation and Audit Services of UN Women. It's a pleasure to share quickly some of the reflections from our joint exercise with our audit colleagues. So as Casper was explaining, in case of UNESCO, even UN Women has by structure a collaborative arrangement in place. The Independent Evaluation and Audit Services is supported by two services, which is Independent Evaluation Service and the Internal Audit Services. And IEAS has a charter that governs its mandate, responsibilities, and activities. So IEAS's responsibility is to provide UN Women management with independent evaluation as well as internal audit assurances and advisory services related to its programs, controls, business systems, and processes. Both the functions are responsible to identify good practices and provide recommendations for improvement and contribute to the lessons. In our case, particularly, we have tried three different models of collaboration between evaluation and audit, and some of it actually fits with the 5 levels of collaboration that Casper had shared. The first model is leveraging audit and evaluation services and sort of carrying it through a joint exercise, where the whole planning, implementation, execution is carried out jointly. However, we are not at a stage where we had a combined report because of the reporting requirements for both the services. We kind of did the whole exercise together, but our reports were separately done for the evaluation and audit. An example of that is our country portfolio evaluations for Pakistan and Vietnam, where we did evaluation plus audit. So we call it CPE plus A. The other model of collaboration has been more around maturity assessments. These are not full-fledged evaluations or audit, but these are meant to support UN Women to proactively and effectively manage new and emerging risks as well as opportunities. And the classic example is the rapid assessment that audit and evaluation did together to assess UN Women's preparedness for cash-based interventions. And this was in the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic, when we were seeing that a lot of country offices were using CBIs as a ways of supporting different constituencies and women's group. So it was important for audit and evaluation to join hands to assess how prepared, what are the risks and how prepared UN Women is. So evaluation brought the gender responsive evaluation lens, whereas audit colleagues, they brought in the lens of good governance, risk assessments, and control mechanisms. The third model that we have tried out is the audit advisory services, where it is designed to add value and improve the effectiveness and efficiency analysis of UN Women evaluations. And an example of that is an ongoing Syria program evaluation, where one of our regional audits recommended that that particular program needs to be evaluated, and there was a special impetus on looking into its efficiency assessments and value for money, and therefore we invited our audit colleagues to sort of join our team. We maintain complementarity by design. So while evaluation looks into the OECD DAC criteria of, say, for instance, relevance, coherence, effectiveness, human rights, and sustainability, our audit colleagues take a lead on assessing the adequacy and effectiveness of governance arrangements, risks management, and control practices. Our governance and management arrangement for these joint exercises are pretty standard, where we have the director of IEAS providing the oversight, the chief of evaluation services accountable for evaluation related activities, the chief of audits are accountable for audit related activities. We have co-team leaders led by the evaluation specialist and the audit specialist, and of course the team also includes audit and evaluation specialists. So what are some of the uses of carrying this exercise or similar exercises? First of all, it reduces the burden on the country office and definitely strengthens the coherence. If a country is due for an evaluation and audit, it makes sense to combine both the exercise. It increases the usefulness and impact for accountability and quality decision making. It helps to intensify efforts towards strengthening evidence base and knowledge, and it proactively helps to manage good governance risks and opportunities. However, as we were discussing in the previous part of the presentation, that it comes with certain challenges. The first one being potential for confusion about who is doing what, and is evaluation now becoming equivalent to audit. So it's extremely important to talk about how these two processes are complementing each other, and there has to be a consistent good communication as well as highest degree of transparency from the start. Different reporting practices, I think we have talked about it. Audit is expected to maintain and provide certain audit opinion and follow a certain standard format, and so does evaluation. So in our case, what we decided to do was to have two separate reports and adhere to the respective reporting standards. Timelines also at times have been a bit of a challenge, and I think Casper, you had touched on that. So overall, I think it has been an interesting experience where we've been able to make use of each other's expertise. But moving forward, as and when we kind of go more deeper into this joint collaborative exercise, we realize that it's important for us to get a more clarity about structures and processes around working with our audit colleagues. Thank you.
Yeah, Chaitali, thank you so much. This was a very good summary, and I think there's quite some similarities in terms of for example, the challenges in working together, right? I see a hand from Michael from, this is OIOS, right? Michael, do you want to share a few lessons from the OIOS experience?
Sure, of course. Thanks. Thanks very much. Actually, it's Nicholas, but my...
Nicholas, sorry, okay.
That's okay. Everyone calls me Michael, and Michael happens, fortunately, to be my middle name, so it works just fine. I know who you're talking about. That's At OIOS, we've had some experience with doing what I think would fall in your model as parallel collaboration with audit. And the example I want to talk about is the work that we've done on the Development Coordination Office, both in terms of audits and evaluation. As probably everyone here is aware, with the UN reform, the resident coordinator system became part of the UN Secretariat under DCO. And with that, OIOS was given posts for audit and for evaluation in order to conduct external oversight of the work. To maintain these posts, we had to, of course, show good value for OIOS doing that oversight function, and we were determined to do it in a coordinated and collaborative way. We haven't done any joint projects yet between the OIOS auditors and evaluators, but we have coordinated very carefully on work plans to ensure that there's no overlap of the work and that we have broad coverage of the work of DCO based on what makes sense for the evaluation function and the audit function. So in order to do that, just in practical terms, both the audit and evaluation teams met during the scoping phases of the work, including discussions about what we would cover each year, but also down to the level of if we were selecting country level case studies, we'd make sure that we didn't overburden any of our DCO resident coordinator offices with both an evaluation and an audit that same year. We also, on the evaluation side, we were very careful to scope out work areas that would be better addressed by audit. In this case, the efficiency agenda, those questions of efficiency around business operation strategy or common back offices makes more sense for audit. And similarly, funding issues. DCO is also the secretariat to the joint SDG fund, and OIOS audit covered that. We didn't. Overall, the experience I think has been quite positive. We've produced a body of work that is that's quite complementary, covers sort of the breadth of the work of DCO, and it's been well received by the client, both I think in terms of how the two teams have engaged with them, but also that we were able to provide value add by looking at different components and very deliberately not overlapping the work. And maybe just to summarize, two lessons learned, and I think we've been talking about this throughout this EPE, and I think it's very important. One is that communication is essential. I think your UNESCO audit colleague, I'm sorry I forgot the name, finished what she was saying with communication. I think she's exactly right. At the planning stage, we were, of course, very careful to make sure that we touch base and avoid overlapping what we were doing, and we couldn't have done that unless we were, well engaged with our audit colleagues. The other lesson learned, I think, is also that audit and evaluation don't necessarily have to do joint work in order to provide that complementarity, but rather, and that takes care of some of the governance challenges as well. But rather carefully planning at the outset of our engagements just to make sure that we're covering kind of the breadth of work of our client, in this case DCO, and that we're not overlapping, I think is really important. That being said, thanks very much for the opportunity to share our OIOS experience.
Great, Niklas. Thank you very much. This is very insightful. I see another hand from Barbara. Barbara, do you want to ask a question or share your own experience? Please, you have the floor.
Thank you, Caspar. Thank you very much for this opportunity. My name is Barbara, and I'm the chief of the internal oversight unit at UNEG in the Office of Evaluation and Oversight. And I wanted to share with you our experience at UNEG with a joint engagement that we conducted in 2020. And that was started at the beginning of the COVID period, and had some really, truly beneficial results for the organization. It was our first engagement working together, evaluation and audit. And I wanted to share with you here some success factors for this engagement, which probably echo what you had also shared with us previously. So I'll be short and concise. Like other presenters or other colleagues who shared their experience, one element that we thought was really important for this engagement was to have a clear division of responsibilities and have one team clearly in the lead for the entire engagement. In our case, that was audit, and one auditor was also mainly in charge. But what we did throughout the engagement was, like for others, communication, open communication, and a constructive approach among and between the two teams was really crucial. We had a lot of meetings together, and actually, so also the teams amongst each other, but we had one, let's say, backstop meeting per week, where we always discussed the major progress achieved. And we had both chiefs present so that we also could take immediately decisions on how to move on. So it was a very all in all, a very inclusive approach. We shared information, all information amongst each other, auditors and evaluators. And we also cross-reviewed some of the crucial documents, the evaluators, those from the auditors and vice versa. And as has been said by others before, we actually, for us, this was a real learning experience. We auditors learned a lot about evaluators. One thing that we won't forget is holding focus group meetings. And that was extremely helpful for this kind of engagement because the topic was the effect of COVID on our organization, UNIDO, and what lessons learned we took from it. So naturally, this approach to engage our clients, the beneficiaries, and in this case, the personnel, was crucial to it. And all in all, we can say that there was a very large buy-in to this engagement by personnel at large, but also by the senior managers, because it was at a time when we were all working from home, there was reduced interaction. So many colleagues were really very grateful for the interaction that we asked them how they were doing and how they were dealing with some of the issues we were looking at as part of this engagement. So all in all, I can say it was a real great experience. The report, the writing of the report took us quite some time, and we probably underestimated that. We took a hybrid model in the end, so it was neither an audit nor an evaluation report, but a hybrid model that we invented. And we had some discussions at the outset, not only with some of our main interlocutors, but also senior management. And we applied the audit approach and agreed some management action plans. And we are very proud to notice that most of them are implemented or still being in the process of being addressed. So all in all, we can say this joint engagement was a true success, and we're all keen on doing that again within UNIDO. But as has been said by others also before, one has to carefully look at the subject and see how you can complement each other, and some subjects are better than others to work jointly on that. So thank you for the opportunity, and back over to you.
Thank you very much, Barbara. This is very good lessons from UNIDO. I see a question from Theo on the role of the reference group comprising the audit and evaluation. So briefly on that, in the case I was involved on, we actually called it a performance audit in the end, right? It was a performance audit of the CI sector in UNESCO. We did have a reference group. And the reference group was comprised of members on the client side, right? So that was the idea to this, was that if we have on the client side, we have more potential end users, in addition to, for example, senior management, then not only this will increase the quality of the report findings and of the data that we're using, but then also in terms of using the report findings and the recommendations. And the management response was done by the CI sector in UNESCO as a whole. And also, I mean, also reflecting what Barbara just said, we just finalized the performance audit this year, and 4 out of the 10 recommendations have already been implemented. So that's a good sign of how the take-up of the report is going. I realize time is overdue, and unless there are burning other questions, I think I'd like to wrap up this EPE just by sharing some of the key takeaways that I noted down. I think there's some of the issues and some of the lessons that we need to reflect upon when we start planning or deciding about a joint engagement is around we need to reduce the potential confusion. Is it an audit? Is it an evaluation? And I think it goes back to the discussion we had earlier on how do we name the baby? We need to agree on the reporting formats and the type of products that we're presenting. We need to be clear on the time frame. Given it is a joint process, it will take more time than if we work in isolation, presumably. I think we have also seen from the other colleagues that the take-up of the report of a joint product is very good, right? Because the credibility is very high, and you probably gather insights and are able to generate lessons that go beyond your own single evaluation expertise only. Very important takeaways on communication, right? Communication not only within the team between audit and evaluation colleagues, but also towards the outside, right? What product are you going to get? When are you going to get it? And then how are we communicating the product itself to the broader external audience? I like the point about the different modalities, and I think I saw this also in the chat. The colleagues mentioned that. I mean, it starts with not doing the same assessment as your colleagues have already done, right? So even if you don't work together on a concrete process or in a concrete product, then just by sharing your plans, making sure you're not doing an evaluation on the same topic as your audit colleagues are doing an audit on, I think this already helps to reduce some of the oversight burden that we spoke about in the beginning. Yeah, but overall, I think the lesson is the experience is positive if a certain number of factors come together, and obviously joint planning and coordination and agreement on those different types of protocols during the process is key. So with having said that, I'd like to conclude this webinar, this EPE on lessons from joint evaluation and audit. I think we can spend much more time on discussing these issues. I mentioned at the beginning, probably there's scope for further work on this at UNEG level. But for now, let's wrap up. Thank you very much for listening in. Thank you for sharing. And we'll share the proceedings, this EPE, on the UNEG website. So for everybody who has not been able to listen the whole time, you can access it. Thank you very much. And it was great meeting you online. Bye for now.